Do you believe in ghosts? Do you believe in the afterlife? Do you believe in heaven? If you do believe in heaven, do you believe it is a paradise? I asked myself these questions once, the last one being the most recent I came up with. Because I do believe in ghosts, the afterlife, and the existence. However, I no longer see heaven as a paradise for souls to rest in peace, but just another hell. I will never forget the chilling experience I had during my near-death situation. An experience that'll scar me for the rest of my life. Before I begin, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Ryan Smith. I work an office job as an accountant and had a normal life as any average American. Even though I'm single, I'm content with living an independent life. No wife and kids or marital problems to deal with, at least not yet. I'm trying to be careful with finding a woman since the last one I was with decided to cheat on me with another guy. I was glad we were boyfriend and girlfriend. We never married nor did we have any children. So the breakup was easy and I don't have to worry about child support. I've been living alone in my own house in a town that's very peaceful and quiet. Contrast to living in a city, I was perfectly content where I now am and the people are friendly. Neighbors even came to my house and brought food and greetings over and I was happy to meet them. Everything was fine and things were looking up for me at the time. It beats having lived in the city 2 years ago where there was constant noise even at night, let alone the occasional gang violence involving gunshots. I'm still content with the way of life in this peaceful and quiet town. However, part of my experience has changed my view of death and dying. Now I'm afraid of death, more specifically of what will happen to me when I die. I fear those bastards will come for me once my body expires and I become a spirit. Those angels, or what pretends to be angels, are waiting for us behind a white light. I remember that old movie reference, "Do not go into the light." I did not think such words could be so true. You see, it all started when I was doing my usual commute. Before I was heading to work, I made my breakfast and ate as usual before driving off. Once I finished and drove off, I usually expect the school traffic to be around this time, which I didn't mind since my workplace was only 10 minutes away and I had 30 minutes to spare. I am an early bird too, since I don't like the idea of showing up to work at the last minute, or worse, late. Unfortunately, this was the day I never made it to work. Why? Because this was the day I got into my first car accident. I had the right of way, but sadly, one of the delivery truck drivers didn't seem to pay attention to the turning lane. I still remember that green arrow light that displayed, telling me that it's time for me to turn. However, I noticed the delivery truck still approaching, and it became clear to me that the driver wasn't stopping the truck despite the red light. From what I could see, he was looking down at something, as if he was staring at his phone or trying to grab something he dropped. But at the moment, he saw me turning in and realized what was happening. It was already too late. Even when he hit the brakes and used the emergency brakes, it wasn't enough to stop both his truck and my car from collision. The last thing I remember is seeing that truck slam into the right side of my car as I was turning. The impact caused my car to flip and I was suddenly knocked unconscious as my head hit the car window to my left, as far as I could tell. After that, there was nothing. I was very surprised when I didn't feel any pain from the impact, but I am assuming it's because my soul had already left before I could suffer from the excruciating pain I felt when I came back to my body. Just then, my vision slowly started coming back. I noticed my head was laying on the driving wheel. I tried to make sense of that because I recall the car flipping from the impact. But what scared me the most was when I lifted my head up and saw my head still laying there. Except it was the head of my body still laying on the driving wheel. It looked like it had been severely wounded as I noticed blood dripping from multiple parts of my body's face. I was shocked to see how bad the accident was. Then the delivery truck driver came walking up to my car window and was peeking inside. If there was one thing that pissed me the fuck off about him, the motherfucker came out of his truck unscathed from the collision. I yelled at him as he took out his phone to call 911, looking surprised and frightened over the crash he caused. "Fucking pay attention, you stupid piece of shit. You could have killed me." I said that, not even realizing I was already dead. However, he didn't respond or look at me. That pissed me off even more. That's when I opened the door of my car and walked up to him. Despite being in front of him, he didn't look in my direction, but I heard the operator on his phone pick up. For some strange reason, I could hear the operator's voice loud and very clear regardless of the fact he didn't put the phone on speaker to talk. 911, what's your emergency? Then the truck driver responded, yeah, there's been a car accident. There's a man in the car, he looks like he's not breathing. Can you send an emergency response team right away? Even though he was calling for an emergency team and informing them of the location along with my condition, I was still pissed off at him and decided to punch him in his face for his fucking stupidity. However, as I threw a fist at him, I was horrified. My punch didn't even hit him nor faze him. Instead, it just went through his face. That is when it hit me. I wasn't in my body. That was why the driver couldn't see or hear me when I was in front of him while he was calling 911. That's when I looked into my car. My body was sitting there, and then I understood that I was outside of my body, unable to interact with any living person. But the strangest thing was, I didn't feel like I died from the collision. In fact, it felt like I was still alive. Even though I didn't have my physical body, what my experiences felt like made me believe I'm still in my physical body. I could still smell, touch, listen, taste, and even see despite having no eyes, ears, nerves, a nose, or even a mouth. Despite the lack of a body and everything in it, I could still move and think. I was walking around with hopes to see if both my body and my car hadn't sustained any considerable damage. My car appeared slightly totaled, but it was at least repairable. But my body was severely damaged from the impact. I was grateful that none of my limbs required amputation, so the situation wasn't as bad. But I found out that I had injuries to two of my most vital organs, that being my heart and liver. Even when the injuries weren't fatal, my two organs needed much time to fully heal. As I was looking around, I noticed some interesting differences. The buildings I once saw with my two eyes appeared slightly different color-wise. One building, being a shopping store, appeared brighter in color, as did all the other buildings. Even the people seemed a little different. Even though they still looked the same, I was able to make out what was on their faces. One person who was looking at the incident had tiny bits of hair on his bald head. It was one of my neighbors. With the naked eye, those tiny bits would have been harder to see. Yet, I could see them clear as day. Not only were they clearer to see, but the auras they gave off seemed very clear to me. A woman who came by had an aura that surprised me. From what I could sense out of her, she was waiting for the day I would approach her and ask her for a date. I also recognized who this woman was. Sherry Kelp. She was one of my co-workers before, until she got another job working for a tax company. When she came to the scene and saw my body, I felt her energies change from feelings of emotions and love to feelings of sadness and pain, believing I was gone from this world without saying goodbye. Reading her, I could also sense she was nothing like my last girlfriend. She is the kind of woman who is faithful and traditional, the perfect wife for someone like me. Just seeing her, sad and tearful, brought sorrow to my eyes. If only I knew of her feelings toward me and the fact she is someone any man will be lucky to have or dumb enough to screw over, I would have approached her. Sadly, this couldn't be done since my body was laying dead, so there was nothing I could do but look on in sadness. Shortly after, the EMTs arrived with their emergency truck. They opened the door to my car and they carried my body, placing it on the gurney and taking it into the back of their vehicle. Sherry cried out with tears upon watching my body being taken, and I wanted to try and comfort her. But I recalled I couldn't interact with anyone who was alive. Since there was nothing I could do, I decided to head to my workplace, hoping to see my colleagues along with my boss and supervisor one last time, having the thought that I'll never get to work with them anymore. As I was walking, I simply observed the surroundings all around me. Some people drove to see what happened at the accident, while others simply drove away. Half of those people who drove off having busy schedules or too much time to worry about me or my case, which was understandable. The one thing I didn't understand was seeing a figure in the distance approach me in the opposite direction. I would pass this off as a person walking by. However, something was off about this one. It was a man, of course, but he appeared to be looking directly at me as if he could see me. As we got close enough, I was able to get a good look at his face. His face looked extremely pale and his eyes were completely glared on me. He appeared to be wearing a black fedora hat and a black business suit. I slowly began to freak out, but when we got inches close to each other, he stopped to speak to me and I stopped to listen. "It is okay, dear boy. You're safe now," he said. Even though he scared me a little, I did feel a soothing calmness in his voice. It was the feeling as if I wasn't in any danger. I would have believed it if not for a gut feeling within me telling me I would be in a lot of danger. However, I regret not listening to it. By that moment, the man told me everything. "Do not fret, dear one. I'm a spirit guide. I'm here to guide you to heaven as I have many others." He spoke to me. "Heaven?" I asked confusedly. "Yes, it is time you come to heaven," the entity spoke. "But what if I don't want to go to heaven?" I suddenly asked without realizing as the gut feeling in me kept pressuring me not to go with the guide. "You must come with me," the entity demanded. The soothing in his voice now turned to anger. Just at that moment, a bright light started appearing beside us. After looking at it, I could suddenly feel the energies emanating from it. It had this soothing feeling of love and peace flowing out in it, enticing me to go into it. I felt as if everything happened so sudden, as if I was in some sort of movie that fast-forwarded straight to my death. Upon observing it, I felt my soul becoming more and more enticed. I was about to go in when another voice, as I can describe it, told me not to. It was my gut instinct, now begging me, becoming louder than ever, not to go into that light. That's when the entity took me by my arm and dragged me towards that light. "No," I said, telling him that I need time to think. "Don't you wish to see your deceased relatives?" the entity asked me. Upon hearing that question, that was the one thing that enticed me to go in the light, drowning out the pleading from my gut instinct that was making me refuse to go in it. But even then, I wanted to see my grandmother, who passed away when I was a small boy. My father had died 2 years ago, and I never got the chance to say goodbye to him, let alone go to his funeral, because I was stuck at a dormitory in college due to the pandemic. Since I was close to those two, I figured this would be a good time to see them again. Despite the fading protests from my gut instinct, I decided to walk in with hopes to meet them. Upon entering, I came upon a realm that was nothing like Earth. However, I heard stories that heaven was a beautiful place where sits a beautiful garden, along with a golden road that leads to paradise. I saw none of that. Instead, there appeared to be large stone monuments designed to erect an entity, whose image I couldn't describe nor recall. The one thing I could recall was that the appearance of the entity being erected was not pleasant, but that wasn't the part that terrified me the most. There also appeared to be angels, yet they didn't appear human-like or anything remotely close to human. Most of these angels resembled creatures we'd see on Earth, while others appeared to be something you'd find in a horror movie. The guide gave off a strange screeching noise, and I understood this to be a call to one of the angels in this realm. One angel responded to his call, one whose face I'll remember for the rest of my life. The angel had multiple eyes on its face and even all around its limbs. In my opinion, this thing had one of the most terrifying appearances, one scary enough to drive anyone mad just by looking at it. "Take this one to his place," the guide said. That's when the angel took me by the arm and flew away, taking me to another area in heaven. In the distance, I could see a massive entity sitting down. This entity appeared to be looking down at something. When I took one look what he was seeing, I felt my heart sink with despair. There appeared to be humans on the ground, and they all seemed to be making more of those monuments. When we got closer, I could hear them screaming and crying. I realized that these humans were being worked to death, and yet they could not die. The angel landed me down next to the area of the crying humans and spoke to me in a language that I had no knowledge of, but for some reason, I could understand what it said to me. "Get to work." It spoke to me without moving its mouth. Upon looking at the surroundings, the faces of the humans appeared as if they had been crying for so long, as if endless. Their pain was endless, the work was endless, the crying and screaming they gave off was endless. To my horror, I saw my grandmother in the distance among them. I ran towards her, trying to confirm who I'm looking at. Sure enough, it was her. I was horrified of what they did to her. I could see scratches and bruises all over her body, as if she was not only beaten, but she was enduring the pain and hardship of labor. Even more sickening was her appearance, the same elderly form. Not once in my life had I felt so disgusted how heavenly beings could do this to people, especially to elders who would be understandably of retirement or unable to work. Nevertheless, just seeing what my grandmother is forced to go through in the afterlife was a gut-wrenching thing. I looked right at the massive entity, who appeared to be looking right at me. I had so much anger and hatred built in me over what was going on. I understood that the monuments were built to commend him. What he looked like, he was not a man with a beard, but something a bit more terrible. I could not describe it for some reason, so the best way I could describe this entity is having red skin with black horns that are on his face with yellow snake eyes. Even teeth, lots of teeth I could see since he grinned at me in disgust. I began to think I was looking at the devil. Phew, I was about to snap at him until I was cut off from a hand touching my shoulder, alerting me. I turned to see who it was, and it didn't make me feel any happier. It was my father. He looked at me with a sad face and a trembling tone of voice. He sounded like he was panting, as if he ran up to me from a long distance. "Father," I asked. "Son, you must get out. This is not heaven. This is not paradise. It's horror." He was cut off by a loud booming sound. I turned to see the massive figure with its mouth open, pointing directly at me and my father. What followed next was something I'll never forget, and something I'll curse that massive entity for doing. The angel that took me to this place struck me down in anger. It spoke to me in a horrifying tone. "Our God instructs me to transport you to hell for your insolence if you refuse to please him with your works," it said. I looked at the giant thing one more time and gave it a look of disgust and hate. Then I cursed at it. "Fuck you. I hope you burn in your own hell for this vile deed, you fucking piece of shit. Fuck you, fuck all your spirit guides and angels, and fuck your heaven, you fucking evil demon," I yelled at it. Then it got angry at me, gave an even louder booming voice, and pointed right at me in a furious manner. Just then, the ground beneath me opened, revealing an area filled with nothing but fire, brimstone, and hot lava. I fell in, and my grandmother looked down at me, crying even harder. In that moment, I understood that in her own eyes, her beloved grandson was forced to suffer a horrifying fate, eternity of torture in hell. This was all because of my transgression of refusing to kiss the ass of that fucking prick sitting in the throne. I began to think Lucifer successfully overthrew the God of Heaven and has now become its new ruler, only to be far worse than what I thought the God of Heaven would be like. In all honesty, I would rather be sitting on a cloud, forced to play a harp for the rest of my existence, if that's what the previous heaven was like. It still beats being forced to do agonizing work, building monuments with our bare hands for the rest of our existence. I didn't have much time to ponder on why such a situation existed as I landed into the lava, forced to feel its burning effects. The heat was unbearable. What made it worse was I could not die from it. The entire few moments I've been in there, death did not come for me, not even a second time. One of those demons came towards me while I climbed out of the lava pit screaming in pain, trying to get out. As my hand touched the stone floor as I could describe it, the demon creature plunged its spear in my hand, causing me to feel pain from the stab. As I got up and tried to get the spear out of my hand, it took the spear out and stabbed it into my chest. Then it lifted me up and threw me back into the lava pit. I was writhing in pain, screaming from the burning agony being inflicted on me. The demon was there, laughing at me for what it did. I considered it a miracle to be back here because after a few long moments of torture in that horrible place, I suddenly felt myself shot back into my body and waking up in the hospital. I felt my body was in pain, but that was nothing compared to what I experienced in the afterlife, so the pain I had around my body didn't seem like much. Still, I needed to be careful. My mother was in the room, crying with tears of joy that her son came back. Even I cried with tears of joy, having got out of such a horrible situation. My mother hugged me, and my pain scream indicated my body still needs to heal. Just then, I remembered everything in that experience, with the exception of the entity's face. It was the only thing I couldn't remember. I even explained to my mother everything that happened when I was temporarily gone, and even warned her. "Mother," I said, crying. "I saw father and grandmother. They're not okay. Heaven is not a place to be in. Stay away from it. Don't go to it," I said to her, begging her to listen to what I was saying. I wasn't surprised, but I was saddened to see that my mother disagreed with what I said. After all, she was a devout Christian who held strong faith in the God of heaven, refusing to believe the possibility that Lucifer had taken over heaven and has made it into another hell. Still, I tried my best to tell her the truth of what I saw to help save her and the rest of my family from what will await them right at the moment of their deaths, but to no avail. So now, here I am. The only bright side is I'm now with Sherry, the woman who had an interest in me. After finding out her feelings toward me, I decided to meet up with her and ask her on a date, and as I thought, she immediately brightened up and said yes to me. I wish I could tell her about what I experienced in the afterlife before I came back and try to warn her. But that might be difficult, since she is much like my mother, she's also devoutly religious. Hopefully, I'll have the courage to tell her. I do not have the courage so far for that, nor the courage to walk inside of a church or any religious buildings to reveal to them the horrifying truth about heaven and what it really is. However, I do have enough courage to tell all of you about all of this. You see, heaven isn't a paradise for humanity. No, it's a paradise for the gods, and only the gods. That's probably why they referred to it as heaven, as it was not meant for us. It was meant to be their heaven. Where do we go? Hell if I know. If anything, I think you would be better off staying on Earth as a lingering spirit. But I will give you this one warning. If you have a near-death experience or become a lingering spirit, and you see an extremely pale man with a black fedora hat with a black business suit looking directly at you, do not acknowledge him. Thank you to my superfans, Sweet Black Swan, Tacey, and Brooklyn. I really appreciate you guys supporting my channel, and I look forward to making more content for everyone.